The ground cracked open in Ujjain. Not a tremor, a split, and out of that split rose a form of Shiva that had never existed before. Matted hair, wild around his head, a garland of skulls at his throat, eyes burning, and from his mouth a single roar that had turned an entire demon army to ash. This was a moment Shiva became Mahakal, the great conqueror of time. And the story of how it happened, why it happened here in Ujjain of all places, is stranger than most people realize. To understand why, we have to start with the city itself, because the city is part of the answer. Ujjain, ancient name Avantika, one of the 7 moksha puris, the 7 cities where a person who dies is said to attain liberation. But Ujjain was more than that. It sits on the Tropic of Cancer, and for over 1,000 years, long before the British ever drew a line through Greenwich, Ujjain was a zero meridian of Indian astronomy. When Varahamihira wrote his text, he measured from Ujjain. When Brahmagupta did his calculations, he did them in Ujjain. When Indian astronomers drew maps of the sky, Ujjain was the center. The city's name, Ujjaini, meant she who conquers. In a civilization obsessed with measuring time, Ujjain was a place from which time was measured. Hold on to that, it is going to matter. But the story of how Shiva came to the city does not begin with astronomers. It begins with a Brahmin and his 4 sons. In this city in Avantika, there lived a Brahmin named Vedapriya. His name meant one who loves the Vedas, and he lived up to it. Every morning before sunrise, he walked to the river, bathed, and returned to his home to worship a Shivalinga. He had 4 sons, Devapriya, Priyameda, Samvita, Suvrata. All 4 worshipped Shiva the way their father did. The household's rhythm was simple: bathe, worship, study, sleep. For decades, nothing disturbed it, until a shadow fell across a mountain to the south. On a mountain called Ratnamala, there lived an asura named Dushana. Dushana was not a small threat. He had performed years of severe austerities and earned a boon from Brahma. The boon was specific. He could not be killed by the weapons of devas. He could not be killed by the weapons of humans. He could not be slain by fire or water. He could not be defeated in open battle. With this boon, Dushana set out to do what asuras with impossible boons always set out to do: end Vedic worship, destroy the chanting, silence the sacred fires, erase the names of the devas from human mouths. He moved from region to region. Some places resisted, some submitted, some were simply erased. Eventually, his gaze turned towards Avantika, the city of the Vedas, the city where a Brahmin and his 4 sons were worshipping Shiva every morning at dawn. Dushana marched on Ujjain. When Dushana's army reached the city, he made the same demand he had made 100 times before. Stop the chanting, stop the fires, stop worshipping Shiva. The Brahmins of Avantika refused. Vedapriya and his sons did not run. They did not hide the linga. They did not even pause the worship. Understand the moment. An asura who cannot be killed by deva, human, fire or water is standing at your gate telling you to stop, and a Brahmin household decides to keep chanting. This is not a household of warriors. Vedapriya was a scholar. His sons were students of the Vedas. Between them, there was not a single weapon. The only thing they had was a chant itself, and they were not going to stop. This is not bravery in the ordinary sense. This is something older. It is an understanding that the worship itself is a protection. That to stop worshipping Shiva, to save yourself from an enemy of Shiva, is already a defeat. Dushana gave the order. His army moved in, weapons raised. Fires lit to burn the Brahmins' homes. Outside, hundreds of men. Shouts, the crack of wood breaking, the first smoke beginning to drift into the courtyard. Inside, 5 voices, the father and his 4 sons, still chanting, still pouring water on the linga, still doing what they had done every morning as far back as any of them could remember. And then the ground moved. We have seen what came out of that split: matted hair, garland of skulls, eyes burning, a roar that turned an army to ash. But understand what the form meant. This was not a calm Shiva, not a meditating Shiva, not a dancing Shiva. This was Shiva as Kal, Shiva as time, Shiva as death itself, a form that had never existed in any world until that moment. And the roar alone was enough. Dushana was reduced to ash in the same instant the sound reached him, not struck down, not pierced, not fought, burnt to nothing by the sound of Shiva's voice. The boon had said, no weapon of devas, no weapon of humans, no fire, no water. The boon had not said anything about the voice of Shiva himself. This is the first answer to the question we opened with, why did Shiva become Mahakal? Because an ordinary form of Shiva could not destroy what Dushana's boon had protected. The moment demanded a form the universe had never seen. Shiva did not choose to become Mahakal. The moment demanded it, and Shiva answered. When it was over, when the ground had stopped shaking, and the ash of Dushana was settling in the wind, Vedapriya and his sons stood before Shiva. They did not ask for wealth, they did not ask for power, they did not even ask for long life. They asked for one thing, stay here, in this city, in this form, so that we and our children and their children and every generation that comes after will always be protected by you. Shiva agreed. He sank back into the earth, but he left his presence in the linga, a linga that was not carved, not installed, not consecrated by any human hand, Swayambhu, self-manifested, risen from the earth itself. And because he had emerged as Mahakal, the great conqueror of time, the linga came to be called Mahakaleshwar. The Shiva who stayed in that linga was not the Shiva who had existed before. He had crossed a threshold. He had taken the form of time itself, and time does not go back. Every detail of how he is worshipped here reflects that. The Murti faces south, every other Jyotirlinga faces east, the direction of the rising sun, the direction of beginnings. Mahakaleshwar faces south because south is a direction of Yama, the direction of death. And Mahakal does not preside over beginnings, he presides over endings. He faces south because he is looking directly at Yama and reminding him who is in charge. The name itself carries the meaning, Mahakal, the great time, not a Shiva in time, a Shiva who is the time. And that is where the city comes back. Remember the thread we left earlier? Ujjain as a zero meridian of Indian astronomy, Ujjain on the Tropic of Cancer, Ujjain as a city from which time was measured. Now look at what the story just told you. Shiva appears as Mahakal, the conqueror of time, in the one city in India that was already functioning as a civilization's clock. He does not appear somewhere remote. He appears in the city where Indian astronomers had already placed the meridian, where the sun crosses nearly overhead at the summer solstice, where every major text on mathematics and astronomy from a certain era was either written or calibrated. Think about what the civilization did here. It took the city that measured the sky, it took the story of Shiva taking the form of time, and it placed them on top of each other. The geography is a theology. If Shiva is going to emerge as a master of time, he will emerge at the point in space that a civilization of astronomers had identified as a center of time. This is not a coincidence. In the way these stories work, nothing in them is coincidence. Even today, the Kumbh Mela at Ujjain, called the Simhastha, is timed not to a date but to an astronomical event. The festival begins when Jupiter enters a constellation of Leo. The city remains, even in its largest religious gathering, a city that tells time by the sky. And at the center of that city sits Mahakal, the Shiva who rose out of the ground because the boon could not be broken any other way. The Shiva who chose to stay because a family asked him to. The Shiva who does not mark time. He is the time. The city chose the story and the story chose the city. And the two have been fused now for thousands of years. And this brings us to the last strange detail. Every morning at Mahakaleshwar, before the sun rises at around 4 am, the first ritual of the day takes place. It is called the Bhasma Aarti, the worship with ash, before flowers, before milk, before water, before any other offering. The very first thing that touches Mahakal each morning is ash. In the oldest tradition, that ash came from a cremation ground, from a freshly burning human pyre. Today, the practice has changed. The Bhasma is now prepared from cow dung, burned and purified in a sacred fire. But the symbolism has not changed. Ash is still ash, and ash is still what the body becomes at the end. Think about what that means. Every other temple in India begins the day by washing the deity in pure water, removing impurity, preparing a clean surface for offerings. Mahakaleshwar begins the day by smearing the murti with ash. Why? Because Mahakal is not being purified for the day. Mahakal is being reminded who he is. He is a Kal, he is time, he is the end of all bodies. He wears the ash of the dead, not as decoration but as identification. The Bhasma is not an offering to him, the Bhasma is him. And when a devotee stands outside the Garbhagriha at 4 am and watches an archaka place that ash on a linga that rose out of the earth thousands of years ago to destroy a demon no weapon could touch, in a city that was a zero meridian of the ancient world, facing the direction of death, it is hard to think of it as a temple at all. It feels more like standing at the beginning and at the end of time at the same moment. That is why Shiva became Mahakal, because an Asura had found a loophole in every weapon of every world, and only the voice of Shiva himself could close it. Because a Brahmin family refused to stop chanting even when death stood at their gate. Because the one city in India that had map time needed a god who was time. He did not become Mahakal by choice. The moment made him. And then the people of Avantika asked him to stay, and he stayed. If you enjoyed watching this video, hit subscribe because we have the stories of all 12 Jyotirlingas coming. Jai Mahakal, Har Har Mahadev.